The Museum of Everyone is an inclusive portable platform for artists and creatives that aims to amplify a diverse range of voices and perspectives through both artist and community-led collaborative initiatives. The Museum of Everyone is a space for potential, collaboration, original thinking, and action. Our ethos is simple. If you support your community will in return support you. Welcome to the Museum of Everyone. I am super excited for my guest today, who is none other than Clara Rose, an award-winning essayist, multiple slam poetry champion, cultural journalist, educator, and activist from Chicago. In the 6 countries in which she has lived, she has given speeches of socio-political import in a multitude of governmental and historical venues, performed thunderous spoken word poetry, both musical and a cappella, and has worked with organizations and individuals to manifest several progressive firsts, including the inaugural Black History Month Ireland in 2014. While living in Ireland for 6 years, she won the Dublin Slam Poetry Championship 3 years in a row. 3 years, guys. She was a frequent RTE radio and television broadcaster and wrote for the Irish Independent and Irish Times. Now repatriated to her home city, where she focuses on education and Black Lives Matter movement, Clara Rose maintains close ties with Ireland through artistic and socio-political work. Clara, welcome to today's show.
Greetings and salutations, you marvelous lovers of history, inclusion, and spiritual effervescence. It is marvelous to be here with you, Amanda.
Like already your introduction, you're already not like you can tell the artist in you, you know? Like I am speechless. Even reading out your bio, it was just such a tongue twister. I suppose to maybe simplify it for our audience in 3 words, who is Clara Rose?
Clara Rose is a lover of syllabic tomfoolery. That's simple enough.
I
Simpler,
think I think that just
perhaps.
needs a further explanation. You need to expand. You need to expand. You're just throwing out so many things at me. You need to work with me, Clara.
That is a phrase that I came up with a long time ago, around 2013, when I decided to switch my focus from print journalism primarily to spoken word performance. That was the year that I moved to Europe. I moved to Germany first. I was living in an artist colony there. Then ultimately went on a journey from Croatia to Paris, France, and then Dublin, where I ended up staying for 6 years. And making that switch from writing my words down and not knowing how, if, and when they were connecting with readers, they were connecting with other human minds, to being right in front of the people that I'm hoping to connect with and in real time seeing them absorb my thoughts and perspectives and calls to action, etc. It was such a different experience, and it was so much about the way I was presenting these words, which are ultimately syllables. So to play with syllables in a way that it was rhythmic, it was dynamic, it could grab people, grab their attention, shake them out of complacency, shake them out of the moment, shake them away from paying attention to their drink in their hands, what have you, etc. I realized that it was a bit of tomfoolery, that I could dance and play with the words in a way that I could not when they were fixed and stayed on a page. So I started to call what I did and what I do syllabic tomfoolery, because it is simply playing and being silly and rearranging words, language, linguistics, and the elemental units of language as being these syllables, these sounds that we've put together and assigned meaning, and they can do so much. These syllables can move metaphoric mountains, they can move societies towards action. They can crumble societies, they can crumble empires, they can save lives, they can take lives, they can break lives. So the syllabic tomfoolery, darlings, that's all there is for me on this planet. And I know that's the reason that I'm here. So I try to spin the syllabic tomfoolery in all sorts of different ways. And it means so much to me when it connects with someone. And that's that.
I
Say more.
suppose now having been won awards for 3 years in a row, it means you're doing something right. And I can't even imagine how like you feel about that. I suppose my next question would then be how I know you've traveled to 6 countries. How have each of those countries um, influenced your outlook on life or your perspective and you as an individual and as an artist?
I love questions such as this. Well, I've lived in 6 countries. I've traveled to many, many more. And the 5 experiences of being an expat absolutely have impacted my worldview, my perspective on self, myself in the world, what people are capable of, how to relate to very different populations than the one that you're used to, than ones that you look like, than ones that you think like, and just sort of throwing yourself to the wind in those situations. Absolutely. It has both expanded my awareness, my sense of possibilities. It has also increased my awareness of the cruelty that people are capable of, the cruelty and the racism and the misogyny that are inherent in so many people across this globe, even people that might be considered, oh, they're liberal and they're progressive and they're artists and they're whatnot. I learned to shatter facades. I learned to stop believing in tropes about how people are supposed to be, how they might treat me in terms of stereotypes or general mores. I learned to throw all that out and take each individual that you come into contact with absolutely on their own merit. And as hard as it is to not have expectations when you are engaging with someone for whatever reason, whether it's business, whether it's socially, whether it's amorously, whether it's just to get directions in a foreign city that you're not familiar with, to just have more of a sixth sense, more of a focused engagement with the moment and with the person that you're dealing with, because it quite literally could be a matter of life or death when you are a single African American dreadlocked woman traveling around foreign lands that are very, very different from the culture from which you originate. So I think that traveling as much as I did and living across Canada, it was Quebec, very different province within Canada. It's the Francophone province, still one of my favorite places. Quebec, France, Croatia, Germany, and Ireland, and then spending a considerable amount of time in Scandinavia as well, particularly Denmark. Those places where I spent the bulk, oh, and Germany. I don't know if I mentioned that again. Those places that I spent the bulk of my time while as an expat, I learned to expand what was inside of me, to not be afraid to let loose my artistic ideas, because you never know who they might help. You never know who a singular perspective might make, you never know how a singular perspective might make another person feel heard who has never felt heard or seen before. You never know when telling your own tales of trauma or joy make another person recognize something very important in their own lives. So being around such different populations definitely caused me to, in a more uninhibited fashion, to let loose creative whimsies, because you just never know how it might aid a life outside of one's own. But it also caused me to be so much more aware of the fact that there are a lot of people out there that do not have other people's best interests at heart, specifically when it comes along gender and race lines. I think being a Black woman out here doing the Bohemian Jack Kerouac travel dream, which is where I got the idea that that dream was possible. These Beat Generation books I was reading, and reading Jim Morrison's biography, these white men traveling with abandon and living abroad and writing and spinning their dreams of being full-time, passionate writers and creatives. I thought, hey, I could do that. Why can't I do that? Why don't I see myself reflected in these stories? I'm going to go ahead and just give it a try. And I did, and I dug deep. But within that reality, I learned that things are so much different for someone such as myself, such as yourself, who decides to embark upon a journey like that. There are many people on this planet who don't like the idea of an independent woman of color who is intelligent, who is fearless, who doesn't act like she needs someone else to make things happen in her own life. There are still so many people who just inherently do not allow that idea to sit perfectly right with them. And that was one of the sad lessons that I learned. But at the end of the day, those lessons made me that much more tenacious and that much more adamant about continuing my journeys and digging deep into what I know my path and my purpose to be, and absolutely not letting anyone deter me from it.
Mhm. That is great. And I saw that part of the work, I suppose, also motivated by your experiences, um, your involvement with the Black Lives Matter. um, I suppose speaking out about all those issues that you raised. And like you say, so many people don't have a lot of people's interests, especially people of color at heart. They might not necessarily say it out to your face. It's the actions, it's the attitudes, it's the unspoken systems and policies that are put into place. So how do you feel that your work has impacted in trying to raise awareness and create change around some of these issues, especially that Black people face? And now the uprising of the Black Lives Matter, people now saying enough is enough, we need to be heard. At the same time, people are saying, why do you want to speak out? Keep quiet, be silent, you know.
Absolutely. It was a pretty wild time speaking out about matters of race and second class citizenship along ethnic lines when I did in Ireland. It was 2013 when I first started to perform in Ireland, and I was performing work about Black Lives Matter. Just that year was the year that Trayvon Martin was killed. That started up the uprising before an uprising before the current one. Uh, because Mike Brown's death in 2015, I believe that was, started up another one. So I was in Ireland when these, I guess I would call them the first of the contemporary wave of anti-racism uprisings were occurring. And I was so far from home. I was so far from my people, from a sense of my people. So there's really very few African Americans in Ireland. There are a handful of African diasporas, but I knew in the entirety of my 6 years there, I knew three other African Americans and only two were longtime residents. And I was all over that country, crisscross back and forth, and I only met three in 6 years. Um, and being so far from my community, from my culture, and watching these images flash across television screens and laptop screens, it was a very isolating experience, particularly because when I did start to perform work about this issue, though I did get a lot of support in Dublin and in Ireland at large, absolutely, there was also a bit of backlash.
Yeah.
There was, I shouldn't say a bit of backlash. People in Ireland tend to say a bit of this, a bit of that. And I definitely picked up certain vernacular. And it's just part of, that Irish dialect of English. But no, it's not always just a bit of things. Sometimes it's a massive amount. It is an avalanche. It is a dam breaking. And sometimes that's how I felt after I would go on, for example, the Ryan Tuberty radio show, and speak about Trayvon Martin's murder. I would check my Twitter after the show, and oh my goodness, whoever has a megaphone out to the Irish trolls in Ireland and around the world, they just put out the APB on All Points Bulletin. We're talking radio. It wasn't even television. And people were like, I could tell you was a Negro. That's my like redneck voice. I know that wouldn't sound like that in Ireland. But there were people saying things like that. Like, I could tell you're black. You need to go home. Nobody wants to hear about that here. That has nothing to do with this here. We're Irish people here. We don't need to hear about your issues. Take your black, concerns back to Africa and this and this. Just a deluge of things that people would say online and in real life after shows, essentially communicating that they didn't feel these were issues that belonged in Ireland, that they were issues that needed airtime or concern in Ireland, that in Ireland people needed to focus on specifically Irish issues. And even saying an Irish issue, but excluding issues of the people of color living in Ireland is hugely racist. That is denying the existence of entire diasporas. That's denying the existence of Irish born people of color, of mixed race Irish people. Um, and it really came to light because, as I was told many, many times, I was the first person speaking about race so publicly that was given a lot of airtime. And I'm positive that that was because I'm American and have a Chicago accent, a Western accent, because I got a spotlight to talk about issues that African nationals in Ireland had been trying to talk about for a long time, since the 90s, when the first wave of African immigrants were coming to Ireland, the first wave, because there were a small amount of Africans in Ireland prior to that, which is one of the beautiful things that I learned doing the Black History Month Ireland work that I did. But to answer your question succinctly, it was an amazing experience doing anti-racism work and performing anti-racism poetry and speaking about anti-racism issues, because in a way it was this boot camp for me to speak my mind in such a way and be unafraid and be the only one in the room who looks like me and experiencing the things that I'm talking about time and time and time again, invited to panels and I'm the only person of color, et cetera, et cetera, and be fearless and stand strong within that, because there was a large amount of backlash with people not having to have been exposed to this sort of rhetoric and these ideas ever before, and sitting comfortably within that, which is a huge aspect of white privilege, not having to deal with other people's pain because it doesn't affect you, not having to deal with other people's marginalization because it never affects you. And it was so obvious to me how, even though Ireland historically experienced so much degradation at the hands of the British, in the modern day, Irish people have very much gotten their due of white privilege. And absolutely, so many have adopted the white supremacist attitude of superiority to the immigrants in their nation, or just people with the naturally occurring sun protectant chemical called melanin in their skin. So it was at times infuriating. It was at times very disillusioning, if I'm making up a word there. I became disillusioned because I came to Ireland with these rainbow colored visions of shared experiences of oppression and empathy. And me being part Irish ethnically myself, I just thought it was going to be this rainbow experience, for the first time feeling that they were white people who actually understood oppression in their DNA, in their veins, and they acted as such. But I was actually met with a much different reality. But I am stronger for it.
That's true. Certainly, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I suppose this is why I love like working with the Museum of Everyone and the work that is done here. It's really created that kind of platform that gives everybody, yourself included, myself, an opportunity to come on board, speak out about issues that affect us in different ways. It's such an inclusive platform, and I think that's what I love about it, the freedom of expression that it brings to people. So I suppose I'll move on and say, speaking of the issues that were raised, in Ireland right now, it is the Frederick Douglass week, which started from the 8th to, and is going to end on the 14th of February. on Valentine's Day. And there's now so much awareness on some of those issues that were spoken into, considering that Douglass came in 1845, you know, and I saw one of your comments to say like there was a time we organized events and so on and nothing happened. And now there's an entire week dedicated towards Frederick Douglass. Would you care to go into a bit of detail about that, your experience, now looking into the celebration that's taking place now? How does that make you feel? Do you feel like it's really shown the progress of Ireland, I suppose, in welcoming, people of different backgrounds? Please share your thoughts.
Absolutely. My heart is bursting with joy this week. When I found out there was a Douglass Week in Ireland happening, I just, my heart is so full because, yes, a comrade of mine named Shane Curtin, who lives in Limerick, he and I tried so hard for years to raise awareness about the mere fact that Frederick Douglass had spent a considerable spate of time in Ireland, and not only that, was feted and celebrated, and crates of his autobiography were selling out at every lecture tour stop, and people were fainting at the venues listening to his rousing speeches, and there were these connections made about the universality of second-class citizenship, because in 1845, when he was here, it was the autumn of when he was there. Sometimes I still feel like I'm in the middle of an ocean in between Ireland and America. Part of my heart is still very much in Ireland, so I might say here sometimes, but I mean there. But he was there the end of 1845 into the beginning of 1846. And this is deep famine era Ireland, deep under colonial rule from England. And though not an enslaved people, this reality of Catholics in Ireland, of poor working class Catholics, feeling absolutely under the thumb of the British Empire and feeling their lives so drastically limited by the resources available to them and kept away from them by colonial rule. The bridges that can be drawn, the bridges that can be made in the mind to empathize with and recognize when injustice is occurring to another people that one might consider oneself vastly different from in origin, in nature, in culture. This idea of the universality of second-class citizenship, that is one of the primary themes of every piece of work that I tend to do. And finding out about Douglass in Ireland, it encapsulated that for me. And I became so passionate about it around 2015. And so I conceived of this series called Joined Hands in Freedom, hoping that that title would also encapsulate that idea of two cultures, of two disparate peoples, of any peoples, oppressed peoples across the world, recognizing their sameness and the need to co-liberate. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Curtin and I, we did 3 of these events. Was it 2 or was it 3? I remember, I think it was 3. We would invite historians, lecturers, spoken word artists, musicians from around the African diaspora, from around Ireland, from around the world, to speak on the legacy of Douglass there, what it meant, what his influence on Daniel O'Connell was, what Daniel O'Connell's influence on Frederick Douglass was, digging deeper into the echelons of history to find more and more obscure facts, because we were finding out things like, we found the exact corners and homes where he stayed in Cork and in Limerick and would walk there and take photographs and just put our hands on the sides of the buildings. I like to do that. I like to kind of try to feel the energy of a place. I'm a strong believer that when important things, when lives are lived, happens inside a space, a bit of an imprint can stay in that space physically. So we were that deep into it, touching walls, trying to feel Frederick Douglass's energy vibrating there still, because to so many people, this idea that at a time when we were enslaved in my nation, that this man who had to escape that very nation after publishing his now, of course, world famous autobiography, Narrative of a Slave, he had to escape because upon the publication of that book, he was in incredible danger of being recaptured down to the South. Slavery was still very much occurring in the Southern US. So, with this publication in the North, it would have still been perfectly legal for his former master or really anyone white from the South to go and grab him, bring him back, either kill him or sell him back into slavery. So he escaped, goes to England. An entire book tour and speaking tour is planned. He's in Ireland, a country that could not have been more different from the States at the time. And here he is being celebrated as a man of letters, as a man with this incredible mind and message to relay that connects with Irish people up and down the country. And that is the spirit of empathy and just, I guess, being above and a better spirit than the white supremacist ideology that often comes with growing up white. The media images that you receive from as young as 3 years old, I've done some research into this, with both male privilege and race privilege, you start getting messaging about essentially what your role or dominance is in a space and what your role is compared to other people as young as 3 years old. And for white people, the images that you're seeing all around you, the messages that you're getting, the way education is taught, the way I tell some of my friends here, y'all get it honest. I see how the messaging starts to
Yeah.
do certain things to your mind that manifest in actions. But once you get of a certain age, if you do not recognize this and begin to unlearn, then it is your fault. It's not your fault that these systems exist. But it is important to recognize that these systems are wrong once you're of a certain age and attempt to unlearn. And my thinking was that Irish people and Irish culture and Irish history were at the forefront of possibility of actually being a vanguard of genuine empathy in the West, on this planet, genuine white empathy as a nation in the West at a time of such incredible division, the rise of far right ideologies across Europe and the States, just this rise of xenophobia. We're not even a century away from the Holocaust, and suddenly we've got a march of 650,000 people down Poland's biggest city, and you have one of the politicians endorsing it, and that's okay somehow, that's allowed to happen. We're in an incredible era right now where what happened in my country on January 6th, only 15 people originally got arrested on that day. Insurrection at the Capitol, an attempted coup, and yet 1,000 people got arrested at a protest against killing unarmed Black people in my city, Chicago. And I watched National Guard tanks roll down the street, shooting rubber bullets at people sitting on their porches, completely unarmed. And white people can storm the Capitol building and say, we want to reinstate our dictator, essentially. And it's largely condoned and even aided and abetted. So, we're in this incredible time right now where we need a nation of people with pure awareness and understanding of the universality of second class citizenship and wanting to unlearn, wanting to do away with the thinking that manifests as systematic oppression and the boxing in of lives and the making smaller of the possibilities for so many lives. And I was always of the thinking that Irish people could be that, could do that. I still have this hope inside of me that over the course of a century or two, that empathy is going to grow there as opposed to this ridiculous carry on of this Irish far right. I feel like just that phrase right there is just such an oxymoron. But I digress. Learning that Frederick Douglass was there and feted, to me, that symbolized current and future possibility. So I jumped on this. Again, we have this 3-part event series that really gained a lot of beautiful traction. We did it at a hip hop and activism festival called Make a Move in Limerick. We did some standalone events. We did radio appearances. We petitioned local council people, local politicians, trying to get plaques erected on buildings, on historic sites in Cork and Limerick where he spoke, trying to get a statue in other parts of the country where he landed and spoke, in Belfast. And really, there was a kind of barely a murmur, barely a whisper. Our events did get positive feedback on the day, online. People were receptive and happy, but then it would just kind of trickle away. It was considered niche historical interest. So to see that in a mere 6 years, since those initiatives started between Mr. Curtin and I, that there is this week-long fetching of Douglass again, just digitally in this era, pandemic style as well. It just makes my heart sing, because for me, that's Ireland inching, even if infinitesimally, even if incrementally, toward this huge cache of possibility within the heart of Irish culture to be more empathetic than white supremacist ideology just gift wraps and hands to white people on the planet if they choose to pick it up and unwrap it, which unfortunately so many do. And the fact that there's increasing awareness around the reality that Douglass was there and what that meant then, what that means now, and what that sort of togetherness and I don't want to say cross contamination, cross fertilization of realities and histories and ideas, and just the absolute possibility that's there for positivity. Someone like myself going to Dublin and feeling, despite being often the only one of my ethnicity in a room, still feeling warmth and receptivity to my poetry about the Black experience, as long back as 2013, the warmth that did occur, that right there is another example of that same type of possibility of cross fertilization, empathy, and rising above the din of hatred and small minded supremacist thinking.
Okay. I think
Did I answer that question? Like I
the answer is
philosophize.
there. Trust me, the answer is there. It's definitely there. I think beginning before we started this conversation, I did mention that I might throw you a curveball. I think the time for that has come. I don't think we'd have done justice if we end this call, without you rendering us a small piece in honor of Douglass Week. We have to. Not only for yourself as one of the people that took on the initiative early on at its stages before it became an entire week, but to honor your efforts back then. I suppose also to honor Frederick Douglass for the work that he did. And no, it's the museum of everyone. You need to give us a piece.
You know what? I can do that. I can do that for you. Absolutely. The first piece that I wrote about and for the Black Lives Matter movement, called Wet Grass, I started to perform that frequently around Dublin in 2014. And that's the piece that actually won the first Dublin Poetry Slam, Leinster Poetry Slam, that I won that year. And this was the final round piece, Wet Grass. So that always holds special significance for me, apart from the significance inherent in its topic, but also in terms of my sojourn there in Ireland and people's beautiful empathy. Really quickly, just to put a cap on the floor, Frederick Douglass awareness rising in Ireland. The only time I've ever been genuinely starstruck
Mhm.
is when I met Jerry Adams at an event in 2017 that was about Douglass, 2018, that was about Douglass, that took place in that museum in City Center that's about the Irish immigration experience. Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yes.
Yes. There, I finally saw, oh, wow, there's more and more recognition of the fact that Douglass was in Ireland, and an Irish historian at a university there had written a book about it. And I was asked to do a poem. I did this poem that I'm about to do, uh, in addition to a few others. And Jerry Adams was there, and he came up to me afterwards, and he complimented the poetry and shook my hand and said that he was very enamored of my work. And I just stood there, and I just didn't even really know what to say. And as you have witnessed, I am not generally a tongue-tied human being. And so Jerry Adams, a revolutionary in his own right, and the idea of Frederick Douglass became intertwined in my head that day and forevermore going forward. So that's actually something I wanted to tack on there at the end of the Frederick Douglass, my involvement in raising awareness of Douglass in Ireland and that tale, because it ended ultimately, that was not too long before I moved in 2019. It ended with Jerry Adams being inextricably wound up with this idea of Frederick Douglass in my head. It's a wonderful moment. But yes, moving forward here, this piece is called Wet Grass. And I wrote this in Dublin during the summer of 2013 when the trial over the 2012 murder of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black teen walking back to his grandmother's house where he had been watching a basketball game with his younger brother, and who had nothing but Skittles and an iced tea in his hands. And a man named George Zimmerman called police and is recorded as saying, as he was stalking this 17-year-old minor through his own neighborhood, saying that there's a Black man with a hoodie, and I'm positive he's just trying to rob houses. So I'm going to go after him. I'm going to get him. And even the police told him not to. But this neighborhood vigilante, this self-appointed neighborhood watchman, came up to this child, this baby, with Skittles in his hand for him and his brother, and shot him in cold blood on his grandmother's lawn. It was 6 feet from his grandmother's house. So another example of how Black people don't even feel protected and safe in their own homes, on their own property, supposedly, in this nation. And that feeling is not unique to this country. This is our earth. This is all of our planet. Africans are the original human beings. You know, if you want to talk about lease owners, shouldn't it be us for the whole planet? But we still feel not unsafe in so many different arenas in this world. Harkening back to our conversation there about being an expat, a Black woman expat in so many different white nations. And I was devastated about the murderer, George Zimmerman's acquittal. The murder happened in 2012. The acquittal happened in the summer of 2013. I was fresh in Ireland. I was all by myself. I didn't have friends yet. And I just remember sitting in this rented room in Phibsborough and watching the rain flow down the window. And for me, it was just blood. It just represented blood. The blood of Trayvon, the blood of so many unarmed Black men before him, so many unarmed Black people before him, and still, obviously, every day. And I wrote this piece called Wet Grass. And I have not performed it in a while. So if it becomes half of a piece, please edit it so that it's just a little nugget. And thank you so much for having me. When did we begin? When did we begin this slaughter? How long has the flesh of young Black men been cannon fodder? Direct me to the commencement, the thin line drawn into the muck that is the sands of time, announcing the henceforth immediate devaluing of Black life. Has it always been? Has it always been a sin to be brown in your vicinity? To challenge your idea of your own divinity? This is sickening. As the rain beats down my window here in Ireland, the only images springing to mind through the wet glass of a clear torrent is the red blood that began to flow onto the wet grass in a torrent, clearly so abhorrent. The night, oh, the night. Another white passing male decided for America once again. Once again. That black means danger. That black means stranger. That black means no crossing my streets without a license. The night another unarmed black man's blood spilled onto wet grass. Has it always been? Has it always been a sin to be brown in your vicinity? To challenge your ideas of your own divinity? This is sickening. America, whose bones I built, I will never again look at your son without seeing the blood-stained remnants of your guilt. This is sickening. And your right wing celebrates the blood as if it's an epiphany. And I can't remember the very end. I'm all emotional now.
Oh my word, like, oh my word, oh my word. Like, I feel like we just need to end that here. Like, you heard it for yourselves, guys. Clara Ross, I'll just leave her details in the links, and I'll just put them as part of the video. Follow her. You saw it for yourself. Phenomenal woman. Follow her up on her social media platforms. We'll put those, like I mentioned already, we'll put the links. And I don't want to say too much, so enjoy the rest of your evening.